This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. We try and teach and entertain. We try and bring you brilliant guests each week, uh, business to business podcast and webinars. We're thrilled today to be joined by Holly Buckley. Holly's the chair of the healthcare department, the National Healthcare Department at McGuireWoods, and she's going to talk to us some about sort of this evolution from the Biden administration to the Trump administration and what this likely means for the FTC, where there's been such a fascinating period of time at the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and so forth. Take a second, Holly. Tell us a little bit about, why don't you take a second and introduce yourself first, and then talk to us about the impact of the new administration on the FTC.
Hey, Scott. Thanks as always for having me on. Holly Buckley, I chair the healthcare group at McGuireWoods, spend a fair amount of my time working in private equity transactions as well as general provider advising and transactional work. So a pleasure to be on. And I've been trying to keep my eye on what's happening at the FTC. It's been a really interesting past few years with Lena Khan at the helm. The FTC has become much more aggressive and some may say activist, and a big focus of many heading into this election was a focus on Lena Khan and whether she would still be in with a new administration, or even with if Kamala had won. And with Trump coming in, Lena Khan is out, and Andrew Ferguson, who is a commissioner at the FTC, is the new head of the FTC. And there's also now a Republican majority on the commission. And so there's a lot of eyes in terms of what's going to be happening as we go forward. And we don't really know yet, but I think some sources have reported that there's likely to be a continued focus and scrutiny on the dominance of the big tech platforms, which I think is really interesting in light of some of the alliances that Trump's been forging with some of the big tech leaders. There may be a connection there. And it'll be interesting to see how much scrutiny those big tech companies do continue to get from the FTC in light of some of the dynamics in Washington right now.
And talk about that for a second, because under the Biden administration, it seems like once of these platforms work so hard to stay close to the Biden administration and avoid irritating the Biden administration. And there are all kinds of discussions of comments back and forth and dialogue between the tech companies and the Biden administration. Now you've got the opposite happening. These tech companies that were so pro-Biden, anti-Trump. I'll take Twitter aside, because Twitter was bought by Elon Musk as part of this response to what he viewed as the censorship of free speech. But talk about, now you've got Mark Zuckerberg, who seemed to have, to use the phrase from Game of Thrones, bent the knee to the Biden administration. Now he seems to be bending the knee to the Trump administration. Aside from everything else, isn't that a despicable part of politics that now you've got these big businesses that feel they have to bend the knee to whoever's in charge, that it has that big an impact on their business?
Yeah, no, I think it is very interesting. And I listened to a podcast the other day. It was a New York Times one, and there was a discussion with Mark Andreessen, who was kind of discussing these dynamics and kind of the switch. And he described it much more as something that had happened over time, over kind of the last 10 years with kind of the left and its impact on tech companies and kind of anti-business perspectives, and less of Trump won, and so now everyone is kind of flip-flopping over. It was described very differently, but I do think it's an interesting dynamic where you had Silicon Valley, which was a very reliably left-leaning constituency, and now we are seeing a lot of Silicon Valley leadership very much flipping to the right and very vocally and without any kind of hesitation, seemingly flipping to the right and cozying up with Trump. I mean, the whole thing is fascinating and is probably the most, forward flip-flop that we've seen in terms of a group like that.
I mean, it's really fascinating how quickly it seemed to happen over time as they read the tea leaves and so forth. Talk for a second about Lena Khan. Love her or hate her, she was probably the most impactful leader of the FTC in some time. She was very aggressive on some of the merger activity. We saw it a lot in the hospital and health system area. She also was aggressive about trying to get rid of non-competes, which was viewed as a pro-worker, pro-labor effort. She also, had some thoughts on the artificial intelligence agenda. What do you see now with Lena Khan being gone in terms of some of these initiatives, the scrutiny of mergers, the AI scrutiny, the non-compete effort the FTC went after? What are some of your thoughts as to what's happening, what's going to happen there?
I mean, I don't think that the non-compete effort is going to be back at the federal level. I think that'll stay with the states. It's my personal belief. I just don't think that it's going to come back at the federal level. And I think that notwithstanding that, I think there's been a permanent shift of kind of anti-non-compete. It was already the trend, but I think with the federal effort, it's further kind of weakened non-competes. And I think they will continue to be eroded at the state level, especially for lower income, but also just in general, the employment-based non-compete, I think, will continue to be eroded. I think in terms of AI, we've heard some, initial statements from on the federal level, on the Republican side, that there's going to be less regulation of AI than there would have been under the Biden administration, where I think there was certainly going to be a much stronger effort to have federal regulation. And it was, under the guise of national security, but I think there was a much stronger fear of AI on the Democrat side. And I think on the Republican side, I think we'll see less regulation there. I think on merger and acquisitions, I think we're going to see a move away from the much tougher regulation of M&A. And I think part of the sell for the business community on a Trump administration is the kind of more pro-business, pro-M&A climate that's been promised here. So I do think we're going to see a rolling back of Lena Khan's agenda on many fronts. I'm probably most curious on the big tech front, just given the initial statements from Andrew Ferguson, or not statements, but the sources reporting that Andrew Ferguson was still going to continue the scrutiny on big tech, but such a strong big tech presence in the Trump orbit. I'm very curious to see what happens there.
No, absolutely fascinating. And take a moment on the deal environment for 2025. But before you get into the deal environment for 2025, I know you had intended to give a quick plug for a couple McGuireWoods healthcare private equity events. Would you mind giving that plug? And then I know you had some detailed thoughts on the healthcare deal market of 2025. Let's do the plug first and then come back to the 2025 deal market.
Yeah, thanks for letting me do that. So next week, we're going to be in Dallas for a healthcare private equity pop-up event on January 29th. And Chris Kersey from Haven Crest Capital, who's just a fascinating guy, is going to be talking with Tim Fry, my partner, about deal trends and macroeconomic trends for 2025. We still have some space left there. We've got 60 plus folks who are going to be joining us. The goal of these events is to do a little bit of content, a little bit of discussion, but then really just a heavy focus networking event. And that's in the evening on January 29th next week. We still have some space left. You're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email me at hbuckley@mcguirewoods.com if you'd like to attend, and I'll get you the registration information. And then on May 14th and 15th in Chicago, we have our annual healthcare private equity meeting at the Ritz. We're really excited for the agenda. We've really broadened out the agenda this year to have a much heavier focus on pharma services, healthcare, tech, as well as our traditional focus on provider and kind of deal trends. And so it's going to be a great agenda. We'd love to see you. Registration's open. Again, you can email me or just go straight to the registration page on the McGuireWoods website. But it's going to be, I think, our best ever event. So definitely reach out if I can answer any questions. But
one moment on Chris Kersey, who's the founder of Haven Crest Capital. I mean, this is something I did not know. Aside from going to Stanford and Harvard, and I, of course, went to Harvard as well, which is irrelevant but fun to say. But he also is a medical doctor, and he was valedictorian of his medical school class at Emory University School of Medicine. That's literally remarkable. So Stanford, Harvard, Emory, and valedictorian at Emory, and he's been hyper successful at Haven Crest. Just I did not know all that, but just fascinating. And he's also on the board of the Johns Hopkins Endowment Fund. So a very busy, very smart person.
Yeah, he was
Thank you.
also the former chairman of the board of Johns Hopkins Medicine, so just very accomplished guy, and we were thrilled to get him as a speaker and someone to share thoughts on what's going on. He's a very plugged in, very smart guy, so super excited about that.
Thank you so much. So tell us what the deal environment's going to look like this year.
Yeah, so I've got to first of all credit Rebecca Springer, who is formerly with PitchBook and now is with Bailey and Company, who just does outstanding industry reports. And so I was looking at her post JP Morgan report and would credit her with this because I think she does a very nice job of putting things together. And I'm more or less just going to crib some of her feedback from JP Morgan that we're also hearing in chatter. So overall, I think we're all looking at a more active deal market this year than last year, although I'm not sure that we're necessarily going to see anything gangbusters, but I think we're expecting an upward trajectory in volume. What some of her observations are that companies are really growing into the multiples they traded at in 2021 and are ready to transact. And I think some sponsors who anticipated higher pricing are ready to kind of capitulate somewhat and accept a slightly lower multiple and are ready to trade because it's really just time to move some of those older vintage companies out of the portfolio and kind of move on for a respectable transaction. She did note also that the number of processes that were launched at JP Morgan was not particularly high, but overall pitch activity is up. And then finally, just in the growth stage technology ecosystem, many lower quality companies traded or folded over the past year. And as a result, the quality of companies that are coming to market are up on average. So expecting some good quality transactions in the healthcare tech space. And then, of course, some AI announcements and some AI activity expected this year as well. So overall, we are excited, cautiously optimistic, and somewhat excited for the year and hoping for a good year of deal making.
No, absolutely fascinating. So a lot going on out there. Big changes at the FTC. And fascinating because Lena Khan's going to go down as a fascinating person to watch. On one hand, people will say the Wicked Witch is gone. On the other hand, people will say she was the first great trust buster in a long time to go after the big companies that seem to be dominating too much of American capitalism. So really very divergent views on Lena Khan, but a really bright person, whether like her or not. Second, the deal environment for this year should be fascinating, better than last year, should be interesting, although last year ended pretty much with a big bang. And then finally, two McGuireWoods healthcare events, a pop-up event in Dallas, I think January 29th, and then the healthcare private equity event in its 21st year, May 14th and 15th in Chicago. Holly Buckley, chair of the McGuireWoods Healthcare Department, the best in the business. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast.